So what do you think? What percent of new teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years?
50%.
What did you say?
50%.
Okay. 44% of new teachers leave every 5 years, within the first 5 years of starting. This is startling to me. I mean, obviously it's not so startling since we're, like 50, 60%. And it may be reaching that at this point. But we have a huge job to do as administrators to prevent this, because we already have such a small pool of teachers, don't we? It's really, really difficult to find good teachers. But then at the same time, keeping them and training them. That first year teacher, we all were there. It was tough. And it takes about 3 years to develop a good teacher and 5 years for a teacher to be truly a master teacher. If they're leaving at 5 years, we're losing the potential of master teachers to direct our schools and to continue the very important work that we do with our children. So how can we help that? So this is just a little intro about me. I'm Kate Thoelke. Thank you for being here today. I was principal at St. Paul Hamel, very proudly, and I loved every second of that work. This is my first kindergarten graduation at Our Savior. I just started Our Savior here in Houston, and I received my master's degree in educational administration from Concordia, Chicago in 2020. I graduated in my living room like all the other 2020 grads. But I'm very, very happy to be at Our Savior and very thankful that Mr. Girth is taking over as principal at St. Paul's. So what is the instructional coach? So that is who we are as principals. And you may actually have the budget to hire an instructional coach if your school is large enough. But if you're a small school, especially like where we were in St. Paul's, and generally in our Lutheran schools, you have to be the instructional coach. You have to be the one to help our students, to help our teachers to become better teachers. So in that list, we say, first of all, they give the instructional expertise to our teachers. They provide professional development for the teachers. They choose what professional development you need for those teachers. They also should have classroom management techniques. Master teachers, they've had the experience in the classroom, and generally, you're not throwing a brand new teacher into a principal role. They should have a large toolkit in order to help other teachers to grow, and that's what you all have. And we give them continual instruction, and we provide modeling of the classical model to our teachers. So when we are in the classroom and we're observing, you may find that it would be helpful for you to stand up in front of the classroom and just show the teacher if you're having some difficulties in explaining what you want them to get across and how to do it. Sometimes it takes that. So that an instructional coach will provide that. Okay, so the duties of the coach. First of all, we want to make sure that an instructional coach and as principal that we continue to keep our certifications strong and valid, especially being a good model. It's important that we have our CCLE teaching certifications and admin certification. So as a coach, you want to model that as well. Also making sure that you are attending professional development conferences such as this one. Having a principal or your senior pastor may develop a reading plan for your faculty. This is part of that professional development. When we were at St. Paul Hamel, I thought we had just a really rich opportunity with our pastor coming in every single week. We walked through long gospel while I was there. He walked us through the confessions. These things are so important to keep our teachers' minds fresh in the things that we have committed to our beliefs. And if you are a pastor, this is a great opportunity for you to share with the staff and to continue to keep that fresh for them. So don't hesitate to bring those heavy things out, because really They should be the ones who know these things. And so let's share that knowledge. And I encourage pastors, especially those that are headmasters that are trained from our synodical seminaries. So please do that for your teachers. If you are not colloquized, pursue that. Get that colloquy, because as a coach as well, you need to be able to truly bring in your faith and your understanding of the faith so that your teachers can also learn how to do that, how to integrate the faith into all of their lessons. And continue to get higher education. The other thing that a coach would do is actually be kind of a liaison. If you are the principal, then it's, as well as the instructional coach, already you're a liaison for the staff to the Board of Education and the principal. So one of the duties would be that if a staff member has something that they need to address or they're concerned about, you need to be that person, that sounding board, to help them through that. Also, disciplining students, right? Helping with classroom management. If there is an extreme issue, that needs to go to the principal or the pastor as well. A coach needs to keep accurate and current records and record all appropriate information for permanent records of your school. I always like to have the goal that by June 1, a lot of our teachers are finished. Is that how you guys have it at your schools, where June 1, your teachers are out of the classroom and then they don't come back till August? Does anyone have that situation, or are they all there all year? Yours?
Yeah, pretty much they're gone by Memorial Day.
Right. So if you've got them all there, it's still, I think, very helpful to be done. Give them a time to finish that instruction and in putting that into their records. Also, an instructional coach will help the teachers plan an entire year, a curriculum plan. So creating what you have from the start of the year to the end of the year, it's so helpful when you have the big picture and see where you're going. Also, making sure that you are available to present at conferences like this, so that but also be available to conference in the small way where you would connect with a teacher on a weekly basis, especially one that you are coaching individually, that you can meet, discuss what's going on once a week, especially those that have all of us should have a desire to work on a skill, but every teacher should be working on one particular skill, and then you continue to work through that and talk about that every week. And then provide some professional development based on that very thing. So for example, we've had, I've sat in on observations, and a teacher will only teach to one person, right? But they're not noticing that. Especially new teachers don't notice that they're doing that. They'll stand in one place and they'll just teach to one student. And not any other student has been addressed through that whole lesson. They wouldn't know that unless we were sitting in the back and helping them identify that. And then I would come in another week, we would talk about, okay, I would watch again, and then they've got that in their mindset while they're teaching. So something simple as that, but is so critical to making sure that your teacher is reaching all of your students. If you're running into brick walls, then you need to be the one to find the professional development that is going to help them too. Reaching out to other resources, other teachers that you know, other principals, find ways to help them. And you have to make sure too, of course, as the coach, making sure that they have all their curriculum in place. I have been in situations where teachers have been left with no curriculum at all, and that's not fair. Principals can't do that to teachers, right? They're stuck if you don't give them tools to be able to move forward and a direction. So let them know what you want from them, and then provide that for them. I mean, that would never happen in your schools, right? You would never not provide something for them, but it happens, And at the same time, we may also be directing our teachers to produce their own tools for curriculum, but that doesn't mean it's out of your hands. You need to be there to help them all along the way. You are the head teacher at that point, and so as an instructional coach, you must help them and support them in those ways. The last thing we want is for our teachers to feel completely unprepared to start something, right? And if they're feeling unprepared, they're not going to be effective in the classroom. If they feel like they don't have support, these are the reasons why we're losing them. There will be, it's just a very uncomfortable position. A couple graphics that I've got about what an instructional coach does. So they can co-teach lessons, they can help teach goals, and when you do that, you want to always set up an opportunity for teachers to set some goals and then continually revisit them to make sure that they are hitting those. Also assist with differentiated instruction. What does that mean? So differentiated instruction is when you are focusing on each of the individual needs of the student and making sure that each one of those students are receiving the information and are able to express their understanding of that information. Sound familiar? Grammar, logic, and then rhetoric. Is that happening for every student? Model lessons. So like I said before, you may have to get up in front of the classroom and actually do some teaching so that the teacher, new teacher, veteran teacher, it doesn't matter. If you're giving them something new to teach, they may need you to show them how it's done. Review the data. This is critical. If you're not looking at how your students are performing, you're not able to tell whether or not your teachers are effective or not, right? If you're not looking to see whether or not they're actually showing some growth, then you're going to have an issue because you will not be able to monitor how well they are doing in your classrooms. But that is a complete reflection on how that teacher is able to differentiate their lesson. Be a liaison. Be the protector for your teachers. Because you have a Board of Ed, they expect you to report on how well they're doing, and you need to support those teachers so that they feel confidence as well in their classroom. Develop materials. You develop materials that help support them in those lessons. Find out what they need, talk to them, have conversations and find out what kinds of things would help you in your classroom to solve these, whatever issue they're approaching in their lesson. Lead study groups. If you've got a larger staff, pull different groups together, have them study different areas that will help them in their classroom. Help assess students. Get into the classrooms, pull the students out when you need to also help assess. You know when you were in the classroom how hard it was to get all of that done, right? How to complete it. We've done some of that where I would pull students out for Diane's class and I would assess because you simply don't have time when you're in front of the classroom. Be mindful of that, but making sure that you have continual assessment for these kids. Observe and provide feedback to teachers. Do that consistently. That is so helpful for any teacher to feel confident that their instructional coach, their principal's in their classroom and knows what's actually happening. And then you can tell them, you're doing a great job. Let's work on this. Conduct research and make resources available. You do the legwork. You look for things that is needed to be done in the school so that you've done the research, you bring it to the teachers and say, we're seeing this issue happening, let's address this, and then you provide the ways to make it happen. Market the services available. So right now at Our Savior, we're working on a program where we are going to help really truly help dyslexia families. Families with students with dyslexia, and we are working on a way, how do we market that to our community, that we're able to address those needs in the classroom. You're going to be part of that. You're going to be part of improving classroom instruction. It's not all on the teacher, it's on us. It's our responsibility to continue to develop them. We need to improve lesson design. I'm very excited that our teachers who are in that intro track are going through Erica Mildred's lesson planning. What a wonderful technique then that she's able to share with all of us, just like Pastor Paul said in the chapel message today. Wasn't that wonderful? all the cisterns, yes, and all of our new teachers and all those that don't feel very confident in classical ed are getting this today. That's very exciting. Develop quality teaching style. So again, part of that modeling, you're going to help develop that in your teachers. When you're working individually, when you're instructional delivery components, when you're working with a teacher on an observation, you'll see this. Make sure you're watching for the student responses. And let me preface this a little. When I first started out as a principal, or any other time really, when I would sit back and watch another teacher, I'm thinking, what should I be looking for? And perhaps you've also felt that same way. Like what are some things that would actually be helpful to this teacher to know, and what's going to help move them to the next level? So these are some helpful guides for you as you do that. So be watching for whether or not all of the students are responding. Are they all engaged in that lesson? Appropriate pacing. This is another critical thing. Is the teacher moving in the right direction for the students? Is he or she moving too fast, or is it going too slow? Is she spending too much time in an area that is not helpful? And then adequate processing time. Are the children getting the opportunity to think? Can they think? Do they give them a few seconds to just sit back in with the information that you've given them and move forward? Monitor responses. Do they actually listen? Active listening is pretty important for a teacher. If they're not picking up on what that student is saying and truly making sure that every student in that classroom has actually responded in an appropriate manner that says, yes, I understand this information, the teacher needs to continue to work at that. Then you provide feedback to the students. So a teacher needs to be able to provide some feedback for them, making sure that they're giving all of that information. I also like to look for things like, are they addressing every student? Have they said every student's name in the lesson? That's very critical as well, to allow a student to engage in a lesson, to know that they're being noticed and they are important enough to that teacher that what information and treasures that they have to share with them is important enough for Julia to have as well, as Sarah, as Crystal, as Jill, right? That is really important to a student, to know that the teacher is engaged in teaching them, not just their neighbor. Creating a work plan. We want to identify a goal. When you're done with that observation, you're going to then create this work plan for your teacher. So you've just observed, you've been checking for all those things. Identify something that maybe didn't go as easily. Something that's strategic, something that's specific and measurable, something that you can watch. And it's something that they can actually attain over time. This is important too. And you can see results. You want to make sure it's time bound. It's not like this nebulous thing that's going to happen. You're going to say, I'm going to watch 2 or 3 different lessons. We are going to assess this at the end of the month, and we're going to see where we're at. Make sure that you have set goals that actually have some time bound to it. And make sure it's equitable. Tie it to standards. I like to use the word benchmarks instead. That's a very, I think, a very progressive term, this standards. But the benchmarks that we're looking for our students to master, that's much more, I think that gives them a much better classical term for that. But it's tied to our work plan and our school-wide initiatives. High leverage area of instruction. So in the instruction areas that, especially our core instructions, be watching for those things. That's really important. And authentic investment of the coachee. So make sure that you're invested in that teacher, that person, you're developing them into a leader in their classroom. And your work with them is going to, and being authentically involved with them will truly make an effort to creating an end to that goal. When you're in that coaching session, so together you're going to look for ways that you can accomplish that goal. So what are some things the coach has to do to make that happen? What are some things the teacher has to do to make this goal a reality for that teacher? And then determine indicators of progress, data. test results are good use of evaluation to make sure that the students are truly achieving the mastery that they need. And the evidence also shows up in the practices, but your assessments of those students, whether it be oral or whether it be on a pencil and paper, either way, you need to be able to assess them as the students work. In the planning and coaching cycle, what happens? In stage 1, you're going to establish goals for students that are data and standards based. Again, like I said, benchmarks based is really a term I prefer to use in terms of that. But making sure that, let's say in kindergarten, we want to be sure that our students are learning one-to-one correspondence, okay, in their counting. So that's a benchmark that they need to reach before leaving kindergarten. And before they move on to their first grade, okay? They need to also be able to see whatever those goals are, that they are completely directed from, okay, in our data we see that we're really low in these areas, and then work from there. Stage 2, pre-assess students and design instruction that meets the needs as informed by data. So you want to be able to look at what your students are doing and then know where to take them, okay? So I prefer to always have assessments right away in that first week of school. And as I'm sure you all do, but it's very important to set that tone. And we've got, I know many of our schools use Spalding, so you give them that baseline test, right? The first test that gives you that grade level average, and then you're going to watch for the course of the year, over the year, that they reach another grade level above. And that's what you're going to want to make sure happens on every single, those core subjects. Implement instruction, assess and tweak it to keep movement toward goals. So continue to keep working. If you're seeing that students are not hitting those benchmarks, that they're not mastering, you have to go back, assess, and make sure you continue to move it forward. And then post-assessment of students to determine the attainment of goals or gaps and start that cycle again. So if you give them that assessment and you see they've missed some areas, we need to go back and make sure those things are assessed, and we start all over again. Okay. So when I start with a teacher, and there are a couple in here who have done this with me, so I have set up an observation tool. So I have a pre-meeting, an initial meeting before the observation. This typically happens once a year. This is, I ask a teacher, give me a lesson plan. What do you want me to observe? And it's in the first, just 8 weeks of school. And we sit down and I ask them these questions. So first of all, I say, okay, what are your goals and overall plan of the lesson? So they have to answer, what is your plan? I just sit back and listen, let them explain to me what their plan is to get going on the lesson. And then I will ask them, how does this reflect the classical model? They need to think about this, because every single lesson should be based on the classical model in our schools. So they need to be able to eloquently explain to me which parts are grammar, which ones are the dialectic logic, and which are rhetoric, and where do you need assistance. Then we move on to what is taught. So this is dig a little deeper. What are the truths taught in this lesson? What are you going to give to the teacher, or give to our students in this lesson? What are the necessary grammar components to address in this lesson? What are the dialectic components addressed in this lesson? What line of questioning is necessary to teach it? Are there specific strategies being developed? And explain that. And what is the skill, applications, practice being taught in this lesson? What tools are needed to execute the lesson? Okay, now here's an example. And I'm going to take it from really, really basic so that it looks like what you want to hear. So the story Bible. I love the story Bible. It's a great way to deliver the Bible stories, the grammar of our faith, right? And I love the way it's set up. This is the CPH Bible. I don't know that they thought about it being classical when they put it together, but it naturally lends itself to that. How many use the story Bible in your book, in your Yeah, in your schools. And I love using it as an example to our teachers to help frame their lessons. It starts off with 4, maybe 5 terms that are new to them. You talk through the grammar of the lessons that they're going to hear. So there are 4 or 5 words. You're going to ask them if they know the answers. It gets them excited because they can share that with you, that I have that knowledge already. And so some of that has already been front-loaded. You can then also talk about the former Bible lessons that happened that you've already taught them. Remember how this happened? Well, listen how it's going to happen now. Then you read the lesson. Then there are questions that follow that to assess whether or not they comprehended what you taught them. And that's part of that logic of the lesson. The rhetoric is when they're able to retell you that story. So sometimes you might use presentation time to have the students get up and retell one of those Bible stories. That will help determine whether or not they have actually understood your lesson, because they can restate it to you in a clear beginning, middle, ending. Think of all the things that covers too, right? And all the benchmarks you're trying to get your students to be able to do. And it's getting them to the eloquence of even the littlest of them. Of our scholars, what they're developing in that process. Not only are they getting the Word of God, but they're also getting the process of how do I explain it to someone, and understanding beginning, middle, ending of a story. There's a lot of beautiful things happening in that. All right, sometimes there's also some sort of skill that you want to make sure that they are going to obtain in this lesson. It may be even as simple as in a kindergarten class, they are going to use the skill of using scissors. You know, something that simple. It could be that simple, but they have to think through what those skills are. Now I want them to look at the big picture. Explore, where does this lesson fall in this unit and why? So clarify the relationship between the lesson, the curriculum, and the classical model. Okay? Have you addressed these truths before? Can you pull on something they already know? Which goal is your priority for this lesson? Sometimes teachers have a hard time honing in exactly what they're trying to teach. So if they don't think about it, what is the main goal that I'm trying to get across? It's not several things. What does this lesson have to do with the truth you have identified that will be taught, and which specific part of the trivium and or quadrivium in this lesson is addressed? So they can think through all of those steps. So identify some needs. What are the students' prior knowledge and difficulties? So what relevant concepts have you already explored with this class? This is so classical in terms of being able to look at, okay, what have I already taught them? What has already been front-loaded in the curriculum with these students? And so what can I pull from and say, do you remember in first grade when you went through this? Well, now in second grade, we're going to build on that and learn about this. And what strategies does this lesson build upon? What other context could you draw upon to relate to this truth? And what concepts might you predict students will struggle with the most? What ideas might students begin to express, and what language might they use? Thinking ahead about what your scholars will say in the lesson is very, very helpful, because if you're not prepared for what your answers should be, and you haven't thought about what will come up, you may end up going down the wrong path. And so really thinking through your lessons is very helpful. This is the one time where I ask this, and I call it the question. And more often than not, I will get a pause. The question is, what is your opening question? So what will you ask? What is the question that will help lead them to the goal of getting to your benchmark at the end and reaching the truth that you want them to learn? So having a teacher think about what is the question they will open their lesson with to direct that teaching, it can be very, very helpful for that teacher. So keep that in mind. That might be a helpful tool to get them thinking. Okay, so grammar. So how will you present the grammar of this lesson? Are they going to sing? Are they going to chant? Are you going to pull from a song or chant that you've done in the past? What are you going to bring into it? Will you present something visually to the students, kinesthetically? I know that can be very a progressive thought, but at the same time, remembering all of your students, how can you help engage them all in their lesson? And what do your students already know? What have you front-loaded already, or what has been front-loaded by other teachers? Reminding the students what they already know before you teach it. Then getting into the logic, what activities will move your students toward understanding of the truth. So create a plan to ensure that your scholars will grasp and understand the truth of your lesson. What questions will best move your scholars to the truths of this lesson, and list the questions and know the answers before you give the lesson. Moving on to the rhetoric of their lesson. How will students present their findings and understanding? How will they do that? Will it be in a test, or will it be in a presentation form? You have to decide what it is that will be the best way to assess. I would suggest doing several different ways. Not just assess pencil paper. Not every child has the best skills in that, although we need to give them those skills and give them the opportunity to do those things even when they're uncomfortable, because it's inevitable, right? Their whole lives are going to be taking tests, so they need to know how to do that. We're going to give them that grammar of how to take a test, how to do it well. But there are other ways to assess. One would be, like I said, you can present it. There could be other opportunities, like when I'm testing memory, I have everybody stand up, and when you have that first student who is the ringer, they start off and they say it, then you go all around the room, right? And then to the weakest memorizer, they've just now heard it 20 times before it was time for them to speak it. They've heard it. Every student has heard it. Keep at that. It can go the same way all across any other subject. Doesn't have to be in your learn by heart. So our teachers need to also identify what challenges are my students going to face. Your teachers are your best asset in knowing exactly what your scholars need. They're in the classroom every day, and we need to rely on them to determine what those challenges are that they will have, and how do we extend that lesson beyond. So identifying from the get-go, before you start your lesson, how do I not get my students in this position? How do I get there? Have them think through, give them tools, because they will know those children better than anyone else and how they learn. They should, right? Your teachers should know this. And if they don't, that might be a goal you need to set with them. How do I assess that with them? So you need a teaching toolkit for them. So when you're setting these goals with them and you're walking through this, you need to be able to provide teaching aids for them, instructional techniques. You need to give them understanding of how to address these specific needs that comes up. And you may not be the expert in everything, but you have experts all around you in your school. Pull and help other teachers utilize the masters that they have around them. It's not just you. It doesn't always fall on you. And really, that's one of the best ways that we can engage our staff in supporting one another, because they all have different experiences, and some of them, like say you've got a 4th grader with some needs, they can turn back to the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st grade teacher and say, what did you do that helped them? So let them turn around and use the skills and the understanding that these other teachers have gained. And also, you need the ability to be able to model good teaching to other to other teachers. So now it's time to actually do the observation. You haven't done that even yet. You walk through that whole process with them, but you know what's coming or what should be coming. I heard a very strange thing. A principal told me once that I talked with the teacher before the lesson. The teacher told me all about what they were going to teach. I went in there to observe. she taught a completely different lesson. And he graded her down and said, why'd you grade me down? And he said, well, you didn't teach the lesson that you told me you were going to teach. And she said, well, I really wanted to blow your socks off. And he's like, well, you would have had you just given the lesson. So, yeah, be careful about that, and we don't want our teachers to want to impress us. What we want our teachers to do is to be effective to our scholars, right? That they actually do the thing that they plan to do. It's not about us, it's about their scholars. It's not even about them. So here's a couple little things you can help in the observation. Does the teacher, you've all heard the old adage, wait 8 seconds to make sure every student gives them some time to think, just sit back and wait for that. I would suggest not sitting back and counting to 8, but just be in the moment with your students and allow these children to think about and ponder on it. We're not going to rush them through the lesson because we want them to fully grasp what we're teaching them. And then you'll see the light bulbs go on as they go. So be watching that for your teachers. And I mentioned this before, but I still maintain, I think this is really helpful for students to hear their name. And if you've said their name, you've also addressed them personally to make sure that they understand the lesson that's there. So if you've said, Janine, tell me about this, okay, and then moving on. Lynette, tell me about this. You've hit every student. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be jumping around the room. Just making sure that every student has been engaged. Every student is being assessed. Everybody's engaged. I'm also watching for things like, when I'm in the back of the room, is there a child in their desk playing with something, not engaged in that lesson? I use this observation tool, which is right from CCLE. I do not put this in permanent files. I put it in my own personal file, and I give a copy to the teacher, and then I use that to create some discussion. Then I use this and several others to create my faculty performance review at the end of the year. So, but this is generally for the teachers for their support, so that they have a copy of that. All right, so if you're a coach, determine your style. How are you going to address your teachers? So this is one way that you can do. You've had that teacher that says, oh, it's never worked like that. It's never worked well. I've tried that. That doesn't work. They're going to put up some brick walls. Especially your longtime teachers who they've been down the road and they're just frustrated, and that's a sign of burnout, so be careful about that too. And so you want to help bring them through that brick wall so that they can see that there are options as well. So sometimes we use this tool. Okay, so I have a mentor action plan as well. When your new teachers come into the building, you want to make sure that the quicker that you can get them acclimated to your school, the better and more effective your teachers will be. Okay, so studies show that new teachers or new to the building teachers, they have a time where they have to settle in and feel comfortable with where they're at. It's your job to get them from point A to point B as quickly as possible, because during that whole journey, it's very, very difficult for a teacher to know what they're doing. So creating a mentor for them is very, naming a teacher on the staff who will mentor that teacher, will meet with them on a weekly basis, write things down. This is the plan that I've come up with for our mentor teachers, and so that it's timed, it's consistent, and they have someone always to go to that says, okay, how do we do this? How did this happen? I mean, we spent a lot of that last year. Diane came on board last year, and just helping her, always trying to remember, in my mind as principal, what things are there that new teachers need to know, and I shouldn't just assume is understood. So having another teacher that they can go to say, how did this session go? How does that work? Or what's the practice in this? So having that, I could go on and on about that, but we have to move on. Okay, so as in conclusion, in recent years, research has demonstrated that participating in a mentoring program can increase teacher morale, leading to teacher retention, thereby potentially leading to an improvement in the academic performance of all students. That's our main goal, right? So there's a lot of research that goes into if you are mentoring your teachers, if you're coaching them, we can maintain and we can retain them in our schools, which is really our big goal, isn't it? That's our job, it's our responsibility to support our teachers and then thus creating the academic success of all of our scholars. So finally, I just tell you, commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do it. He is the one who will guide us in this, and just trust in Him, making sure that you, the instructional coach and mentor, you keep yourself out of it. He is the one who is going to guide us through that, and focusing on your neighbor, which is your teacher, and serve them so that they can serve their students better. So just some of my references, so that'll be on there. Any questions? Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing from Julia shortly after this. So I'm going to put this out there. If you wouldn't mind, I'm happy to share my presentation and notes and so forth. Or if you need the observation assessment tools, let me know. I can share that as well.